You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanagh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on the show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio in year 15. Can you believe that, folks? 15 years, well, 14 years and change. We've been talking about data, very exciting stuff. The topic for today is something that most of us are getting a lot better at these days, thanks to technology, thanks to maturity of the solutions and just how we work. And in part, thanks to COVID. Let's give a nod to COVID for showing the world that work from home really does work. And we're going to have our best friend in the business here, Danielle Oberdier from DiKayo Data. She lined up some guests for us today, so I'm going to let her run part of the show here. But first, just a couple of comments about teamwork and about collaboration. What a world we live in today. I can't even imagine not having Google Docs, for example. I'm a big fan of Google Docs. I can't imagine not being able to collaborate in real time on documents with teams all over the world. We do it all the time these days. I'm old enough to remember print production, baby. I was a print guy. I was a newspaper man, like actual printed newspapers back in the day. And you had to just throw stuff over the transit. We'd had hand off pieces of paper and mark it up, and someone would have to go and try to figure out what that person marked on the page just to get the edits right. And it's not too productive, not the best use of your time, especially these days when we can all collaborate. So, folks, we have an all-star cast. We've got Scott Castle of Sisense, Peter Thompson of LucidLink. We've got Dhavide, Aruliah at Quansight, and Layla Bouzoubaa. I probably got that wrong. She is a graduate student these days, but has been an analyst and is very focused on data. And of course, our very own Danielle Oberdier. Let's go around the room, just get opening statements from folks. Danielle, why does the topic of teamwork really strike you as fascinating?
It strikes me as fascinating because I'm a one-person team right now. So just like being an only child and siblings fascinate me, that's kind of where we're at right now. And I think that there are so many tools out there that are used for optimizing team efficiencies. And, these can be both in soft skills and also, software. So I'm excited to hear from everybody.
Yeah, let's go around the room here. Layla, tell us a bit about yourself and what you're studying these days and what your fascination with teamwork is, especially now that we all know we can work from home.
Awesome. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. So a little bit about me. I am currently a doctoral student at Drexel University in Philadelphia. I am studying information science. That's technically my degree. But my research is really focused on natural language processing methods. And because I have a public health background, my previous role was at the University of Miami, where I was a research analyst. And so in my research, I hope to take a more data-centric approach to our overdose crisis in the U.S. right now, using trying to understand how people communicate about their illicit drug usage. So so that's me currently. And like I said, I was at the University of Miami for 5 years as a research analyst. Got a lot of opportunities to collaborate on a variety of topics. So it was a really great experience.
Yeah, and research is wonderful because you learn from other people, and that's the whole point of collaboration, right? Many eyes make few the errors. We all excel in different areas. I know, even though you're on a team of one, Danielle, you work with us, so you've got your team in other ways, and it just helps to stay on top of things because one person can't stay on top of everything.
Well, we're a good team, but we're like islands in the sea that have but we're a great team. So there is that. That's true.
Absolutely. Well, let's get opening statement from Dhavide Aruliah from Quansight. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing in the collaboration space.
So thank you very much, Eric and Danielle, for inviting me today. I'm happy to speak to you. So I was, I'm what you might call a recovering academic. I guess by this stage, it's been 7 years since I left my position as a professor of applied mathematics and computer science in Ontario, Canada. I now live in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and I work remote. I've been working remote from here for 7 years for a variety of companies and working as a consultant. I'm now at Quansight, which is a very significant player in sort of data intensive computing, a lot of numerical and scientific computing folks, which is sort of one of my great passions, I guess. And I work with people who are distributed all over the world. I guess I have colleagues in South America, in India, in Europe, and across the United States. And so I've been doing this for a few years. I've also actually, it's interesting sort of seeing, again, because I was formerly in academia, seeing how my academic colleagues have adapted to the shift to doing online teaching and a lot more remote work than they probably bargained for initially. But I've learned a lot about remote. My company is entirely remote, and we have we've learnt, and I've worked also sort of in hybrid situations before. I was at a company where I was remote and there was still sort of a main office, and I've experienced some of those challenges as well. And so I thought that, Danielle, when she asked me, I thought I could come and share some of those with you all today.
That's awesome. And Scott Castle from Sisense, a good business intelligence vendor. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you focus on teamwork.
Eric, thanks for having me here today. So I'm Scott Castle, SVP of Products here at Sisense, and I'm actually in our office for what feels like the first time in 2 years.
Wow.
We're a global company. We have offices all over the world, and I spend most of my time on Zoom. And it's been really interesting because we've really adapted to that collaboration culture, but it's still a challenge. Sisense is in the embedded analytics space. We build embedded analytics products. And one of the primary things that we do with our customers is help them to get everyone who's looking at data, looking at the same data. So this is a really interesting topic for me, and it's a place that we're doing a lot of investment in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, BI is all about trying to understand your information assets, and you don't want silos of data. Silos of data result in different views of the world. So you want to be collaborating around the same set of data. And the single version of the truth they talk about, but there's some debate about that even still. Like, what is the single version of the truth, right?
Yeah, the single version of truth works really well when you're one person. when you get two people working together, you all of a sudden have two versions. One of the things that we really like to focus on is for the handful of folks who can really do data well, your data professionals, your BI professionals, you can all build the same analytics. You can look at the same dashboards with tons of tools for that. But what do we do for everybody else in our business? How do we bring the VP of sales on, the VP of customer success, the VP of support? How do you get everyone, not just those who have learned how to be data pros, on that same page?
Yeah, no, that's important stuff. And last but not least, we've got Peter Thompson out there from LucidLink. And you're really focused on the collaborative side of things and down to the files themselves, right? Tell us a bit about your company and how you're enabling automation and how you're enabling hybrid work.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Danielle. It's thanks for having us here. Yes, this is definitely a topic that's near and dear to our heart here at LucidLink for two reasons. And first and foremost is that addressing distributed work issues that are a result of shared data challenges was actually the genesis of our company. In fact, the core idea for LucidLink came about through the need to solve remote collaboration problem we experienced in our previous company. And that was how to go about keeping a distributed development team productive when collaborating with large data sets, especially when they're comprised of big files. And we spent a huge amount of time at that company and effort sending files back and forth to where they would be used in production. It was a deadly cycle, whether you're synchronizing them, sending them, and in many cases, even downloading them to a drive and FedExing them, and then having to get them all back and reintegrate them. So this was just, it was something that we realized was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. Our solution was then to reimagine a cloud native file service that could provide the cloud as a single source of truth, right? So you've got one place where you store all of your assets, but then through the service allow you to access them directly where they're stored rather than having to upload and download them all the time. So basically the cloud can show up as a great big mount on your machine, just like you plugged in a drive and you begin working with it. The second reason that this topic was so important to us is the formative role that the rapid adoption of these remote workflows played in our growth. I mean, it's not a new problem. Even in 2015, when we formed the company, we were fully distributed from the get-go. We had 4 people in 4 time zones, and we just kept adding time zones from there. And that was just kind of the way of it. But of course, when the pandemic hit, this kind of slow-moving trend that we were tracking, we saw a lot of companies gradually adopting remote workflows and using remote employees. But that slow-moving trend overnight became an immediate reality for every company out there, not ones who are just looking at possibly dabbling in that, but it became an overnight reality. And our business increased 5 times the first year of the pandemic, another 4 times the second year of the pandemic. So it really was formative in the success of LucidLink.
Wow, timing is everything. Danielle, take it away.
Thank you for describing everybody what you do. It's really cool to see the spectrum of people's work, how it varies across a very universal topic. So my first question for this segment is for Scott. I'm wondering kind of how you navigate that disconnect between the team members that are very important in the organization, but don't really understand the data versus the people that are really deep in the data, and how you bridge that gap. And anyone is free to jump in as well.
Danielle, that's a really interesting question. I would say that our whole space, the whole business intelligence space, started from the premise that the way you solve that is you teach everyone to be an analyst. And that got a lot of coding camps going. A lot of people were saying, hey, everyone should learn Tableau. Everyone should learn Power BI. It turns out it doesn't work. It's not that people aren't capable of learning it. It's that we have other jobs, and a lot of the people who need to access data, that you just can't ask them to go get that master's in data science to be able to do that. What we're doing at Sisense is we're saying, hey, instead of forcing everybody to go to the BI tool, every single one of those people have a primary like software tool that they use in their job function. If you're in customer success, you're living in Gainsight or Pendo. If you're in sales, you're in Salesforce. If you're someone in operations, you're living in Excel or Google Sheets. All those tools are data tools. And so what you want to do is actually just bring the data into those tools and let people analyze it with the tools they already know. And anybody who's ever met an Excel wizard will realize, wow, that's a really sophisticated skill. And there's a lot of people who have that. You don't necessarily need to learn SQL to work with data if you have that kind of capability. Here's the trick, though. If you tell, let's say, a 200-person company, hey, to get better data in your organization, all you have to do is build a custom integration between Office 365 and your Snowflake, and then everything will be fine. Like, no one can afford to do that. Maybe when you're an enterprise you can, but it's, you're not hiring a bunch of coders to go build a one-off. So Sisense is actually doing it for people. We've built these things called infusion apps that plug directly into most of the common productivity tools. So Slack, MS Teams, Google Docs, Google Sheets, Google Slides, all those kinds of systems. So we've done all the integration work for you. And what those infusion apps do is they talk to Sisense in the back end, where all your data is managed, all your BI professionals are building models and exposing information. And it lets the user who's sitting in Excel or in Google Sheets to say, here's the data I want. Cool, got that. Now it's native in Google Sheets. I can change it, I can format it, I can visualize it. I'm just working with it natively in Google Sheets. And so that approach, that infusion approach, is all about unlocking the ability for people to access data and work on the same information that's your single source of truth without having to become BI professionals.
That's cool. It seems like you're almost saying earlier, like you allocate a certain software to a certain department, like sales works with Salesforce, which makes sense. And then other departments would work with other tools. And if anyone else wants to weigh on if that's how they work too, feel free.
We find the same thing. So one of the segments that we have a lot of customers in is the video creation workflow, and here the person who's using the tools is not necessarily a technologist, but they're using technology to get their job done. And each one of them have a specific skill, and each one of those skills usually has a specific tool set associated with it. But the common thing is they need to get access to that same set of assets. Now, when they were in the office and they had a file server with everything on there, and they just would go to that mount point or that drive where the assets were, they would do their job and not worry about it. When suddenly they got sent home overnight with a laptop, a VPN connection, and maybe a hard drive, suddenly now they have to figure out new ways to do their work, new workflows. And that's really disruptive. So our whole premise was that they shouldn't have to be data experts or networking experts. They just want to get their job done. So if you can make that disappear, if you can just say, okay, instead of going to the D drive, which is our file server, to the L drive, which is now this new service that's in the cloud, and that's all you have to do. Now you just go into your tool and you do your work as you're doing your work. That's going to take away a lot of the stress and the pressures of having to change your muscle memory to do what your real job is.
Yeah, what a good point there. And I happen to have a past life working with large files in the print production industry. I got a bunch of friends who work in the multimedia industry, and we're talking in the 1990s. Processing animations where you'd hit the submit button or the go button and then just go home for the weekend and come in on Monday and hope that it's still working. And even though that's a long time ago, still the point is with some of these files, they're so big and you have to be able to work with them natively. So it seems to me that's probably a pretty good space that you guys have cornered the market on. We got a first break coming up here. We'll be right back after that. We're talking to a whole bunch of great guests today about teamwork and how collaboration is really changing the working world for the better. And we're all working from home these days, or a lot of us. So we got to get good at that stuff, and it's happening right now. Don't touch that dial. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
Folks, welcome back once again to DM Radio, talking all things teamwork today with an all-star cast. And my good friend and occasional co-host, Danielle Oberdier, is here from DiKayo Data. And I'll hand it over to you to take it away.
Yes, I love to co-host DM Radio. It's incredibly fun. And today there's just like such a good panel here, and we've been having a lot of fun. So my question is for Dhavide. You went from super academic to super corporate, and that's something we've talked about on DataFem and just, on Twitter in the past. So I'm wondering if you can tell me the main ways that teamwork in an academic setting differs from your experience in the corporate setting.
That's a really interesting question. I think that the principal difference, I'd say, has to do a lot with the incentive structures. So, academic, I think there was a big learning curve for me when I first moved into industry and getting used to the time scale on which things happen, right? Because in academic work, when I remember, academic hiring cycles, you advertise a faculty position and a full calendar year can elapse before something actually happens and someone actually shows up. Whereas, you try to hire someone in industry, you can get a job advertisement out relatively quickly. It's a similar thing I would say in funding cycles when they're on the difference between measuring time in financial quarters versus academic semesters is a really contributing factor. But I also think, when I think about the things I've been doing the last 7 years or so in working remotely to US companies from Canada, and having seen, many of my academic friends and colleagues transition very abruptly to, teaching remotely and managing graduate students remotely, it's really been a very unpleasant change, I think, for a lot of them. Universities in general are slow to change, and so I think the mechanisms that they had for adapting to these rapid transitions were not as robust, I'd say, as a lot of companies that I've seen. I mean, and that varies a lot within different companies as well, right? So I am at a company, Quansight, which at the start of the pandemic, we were already pretty much fully remote. So when the pandemic started, there was relatively little change for us. Whereas I know other companies that did actually have to sort of, figure out, well, now we're renting all this office space. What the heck are we going to do with it? And so there are different ways that different companies reacted to it. But I think as far as managing teams goes, I think it's very different for me managing different software engineers and solution architects working on corporate projects that I manage right now, where there's actually kind of a very natural workflow and smooth solutions that we can do, versus when I was mentoring students. It's a different kind of relationship as well, right? So the expected outcome of working with a master's or a PhD student for a few years, who at the end of this process, you've kind of guided them and you're mentoring them, and they will hopefully become independent researchers and academic peers. It's very different than sort of having a customer guided project like we have. By the end of the quarter, we need to have X, Y, and Z running, and these are the deliverables that we have. So there's some real challenges, again, in the incentive structures and what it is we're trying to achieve in these different areas that have make the ability to transition from to remote work different in those contexts. I think that's kind of the way that I think of it.
That's deep, that's getting deep into the heart of what teamwork is, because these environments interact so much in the data science space, but they're so different.
Absolutely.
Layla, you're in academia and have been in you've been in a variety of different environments and different schools. So do you want to weigh in on this?
Sure. So Dhavide is not wrong. First of all, he is right on the money when he says there's different structures, and you could definitely wait a whole calendar year before you see not even a hire, like any kind of like change. But there are pros and there are cons. So, just based on my observations from colleagues in the industry, right, I can see that there is a very fast timeline. You got to get that MVP out there. You have this product, everyone needs to be on board. It's like, let's just push and, we'll make modifications later. With academia, you kind of have the luxury of taking your time in a sense. You don't have this harsh deadline. There are lots of deadlines, don't get me wrong, but it's not, you have a little bit of a more flexible scale. And with the research process, research is a great way to collaborate with different people across different departments. I can't even begin to tell you how many different projects I've been on, and especially at the height of COVID, when I was placed into a team where I had to work with people I had never interacted with my entire life, all across the university from different schools, because the University of Miami had 3 different schools, and I had to figure out, all these different, they each have their own little databases and how to aggregate all these data, and to figure out, how we're going to develop a public-facing dashboard for the public. I've always worked on making internal tools for different stakeholders, but having to make something that's public-facing, interpretable, and not causing fear among our community, right, was a very big challenge. So that was probably like my only taste of maybe the industry speeds. It was exciting. I had a huge rush. In retrospect, it was very stressful, but now I completely appreciate the experience. But with the normal research collaboration, it's very interesting because you get to work on so many different projects and really build a sense of different perspective, how to apply your different kinds of data, and how to apply different methods to all these challenging problems. And I mean, Dhavide is right also in the sense of there is, with the grants and things like that, there is a sense of proprietary, ideation or IP. But, at the end of the day, it is a collaborative effort, and no one's going to be, I've heard that a lot, don't tell your ideas, someone's going to steal your idea. But when you think about it, no one can replicate your idea exactly to the T. So even if someone were to kind of take your idea, they're not going to do it the way you do it, and your contribution is probably going to be different. So it's I don't know, it's very interesting. And during the pandemic, I was that one person that was like, we need to do something different. This is so slow. Where I tried to introduce other technologies into a workflow so we can maintain, consistent production, try not to let things fall, too long, sometimes processes when you're not with that adjustment in academia, things tend to take a very long time. So I tried to introduce more technologies that I've seen that are useful, but also there's a factor of you have to get the masses to agree. Otherwise, there's nothing is going to change. I could be on my own and on an island, and that's basically what happens several times actually. But it's I work with people.
Layla, I think it's really interesting that you. Sorry, Danielle. Layla, I think it's really interesting you talked about the protectiveness around the ideas, but then this sort of relatively comfortable velocity and speed. And I think in corporate life, it's the exact opposite. In a corporate environment, ideas are cheap. Everyone has ideas. We talk about people who are idea volcanoes as a bad thing. Don't distract us. It's execution that matters. But the pace is just breathtaking. I have development teams all over the world. We have different offices. Some of them are 12 hours time zone off from where I am. And the question that I'm constantly asking or being asked is, I can't afford to wait 12 hours to talk to this person. How do I get an answer in 3 hours or 2 hours? The next day is that's the cadence. So it's a really interesting contrast.
For sure. 100%. And sometimes, I'm in that boat where I'm like, oh man, this is one of these moments I wish I was in industry. Come on, can you just please answer me? It's 1 week later, somebody finally gets back to my email. It's just the way things work, because oftentimes people in academia also are involved in multiple projects at once. I can very clearly remember I was in 9 different projects I was involved in, and you just can't handle all of that. It's really impossible, but it's really a me problem. I also have a problem saying no. So people will come and say, it's hey, you want to collaborate on this project? Yes.
Well, I definitely have the same problem. Being in product, all we do is prioritize, because we never say no. We just say not yet. One of the things that's really interesting though is that velocity in corporate life, I think, leads directly to the desire for the kind of tools that I build, because when you have to move this fast, you don't have time to check with somebody. Hey, is this data right? Hey, is this dashboard still up to date? Hey, was this the thing you were pointing at? I need to be able to go right now, right after this conversation, and jump right into a data environment, verify, iterate, and then execute. And so the trust of that central system, that single source of truth, is critical. And that's why I keep talking about how do we get everybody in it? Because when it's 10% of the workforce, because they're the ones who can data and everybody else is being left behind, all this collaboration breaks down.
You use data perfectly as a verb. I feel like We need to work on the adjective next. Like it will make its way around all parts of speech. Peter, do you have anything to add about how all of the other panelists' comments relate to your work at Lucid?
Well, I was actually, I was thinking when Layla, you were talking about adopting, trying to be the person to adopt different tools and workflows to gain efficiencies. And we've been talking a lot about infrastructure and data tools and things in that genre. But one of the aspects that we at LucidLink took on, which was, I think, really successful for us, was to invest in KPI and engagement metrics tools. Because when people are working from home, you lose a lot of those cues that you normally get when you're face-to-face in the office. And some people are better at working from home. Some people hate working from home. And things like Zoom and having video calls goes a long way towards reestablishing a deeper level of connection, but it's not a replacement for it. So what we're trying to encourage still face-to-face get-togethers, even when we are fully remote, as often as we can, even if they're smaller groups. But then also, as I mentioned, we initially used a tool called Office Vibe. Later, we ended up switching to a company called Amplify, who was acquired by 15Five for company check-ins and things like that. But it really has given us insight into how people are feeling before it becomes a problem, both from the management side as well as helping individual employees work their way through all this.
That's fascinating. I really want to know, and this might be something that we pick up in the next segment also, but how, you're investing in these tools, you're investing in KPIs, the metrics, but how do you retain that human flexibility while you're charging headfirst towards the goal that the data tells you to pursue?
Wow, that's a deep one. Peter, go ahead real quick.
Well, it is, for sure. That's a challenge. One of the things that we've done is rather than divesting of all of our offices, we invested in having a great office that people want to get to. They don't have to be there every day, but we find that they want to go there. In our case, we've got a large development team in Sofia, Bulgaria. And I tell you, all of our US employees, especially if they're on the sales or the sales engineer side, love to go over there and interact with our engineers in a great place. And we encourage that.
That's a great line. I just took that down. Rather than divesting from all our offices, we invested in an office where people would want to go. That's just, I actually remember dating back to the early .com days. This has been around for a while. That's when the sort of silliness came to the office place. I remember in the 2001 space, you'd go to like a gaming company and they'd have ping pong tables and pool tables. And when I was at a BI consultancy in Austin, we had a pool table in back, and it was great because you're working, you want to get some frustration burned off, you just go back and shoot some pool, maybe beat the boss a couple times, feel better about yourself, then go back out, do some more PR. But the point is, if you want to go there, if it's a welcoming environment, that changes everything. That's wonderful now. That's a very, very smart strategy. Well, folks, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking all things collaboration. We're making the dream work here, folks. We have an all-star cast. It's really a lot of fun, brought together by our good friend Danielle Oberdier of DiKayo Data. Look her up on Twitter. She's on there almost every day, almost all day, as a matter of fact. So even she's probably trying to tweet.
Almost gave me a heart attack because I'm like, what day did I miss?
What day did I miss? Oh, that's pretty funny. Well, let's dive right back in. Scott Castle, I had a question for you about something you said in the last segment. I thought that was brilliant. You're talking about in the software world, you're always prioritizing, and it's difficult because you have all this pressure. You have people who want new features. You have people who want the new product rolled out. You have people who want to go into new markets. You got people who are in charge of marketing. So how do you balance all that out? Like, what are your tips? And I know Peter has an interesting story as well about the technologies that he uses to make sure his team is doing all right. How do you maintain the optimal level of tension in your organization?
That's a great question, Eric. And this is fundamental to what people do in product management. When I teach product management, what I talk about is measuring impact and trying to understand how quickly can I have it. What do I get out of it? What's the benefit to the person I'm building this for? And how urgently is that benefit needed? And that's kind of the three-piece equation for impact. So maybe a teeny feature that gets me a few dollars or a happy customer right now is more important than a huge thing 6 months from now because I need to make my quarter or I don't want to churn this account. But the real hard part about this is not knowing how to calculate impact. This is something that we all have to do, whether we're data scientists or we're product managers or project managers or whatever. The hard part is the relentless pressure in our environments, because there's always the next thing. And if for those of you who don't know, I'll clue you into a secret around management and people management. You always ask for 10, hoping for 7 and expecting 5. And so it creates this environment where no matter how much you stretch, your boss is like, that's great. Can I have 2 more things? You have to know that your boss isn't necessarily expecting those 2 more. What we're actually hoping for, what my boss is, what she asked me for is, tell me when it hurts. And there's a trust that's required there. You have to trust that your boss, who will tell you up front, I'm going to ask you for too much, and I'm also going to ask you to tell me when it hurts. And that's kind of part of that tension. You want enough where you really feel like you're stretching. And actually, I've had employees who said, "You're not giving me enough work. I'm bored. I need to be pushed further." But you also want to. But that's that trust. Is they'll only tell you that if they trust you. But the flip side is you don't want to push somebody past the breaking point, because that's when you get dysfunction. That's when you get real problems.
Right. What a good point. And Peter, you had a great comment in the break there about the technology that you use and how you're able to gauge from sign-ins and things of this nature what's going on. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, well, and I agree completely. Finding that right tension to continue to get production done and be fast moving, and especially as a startup. We were a classic ventures funded startup from 2015, so it's always about hitting the next metric and getting the next round of funding done. But we just recently came out of a pretty major release. That was one of those that took a lot of effort, and we drove everybody very, very hard. And of course, it's easy to say throughout, well, this one is really important. We got to get this out the door. We got to get this out the door. And that's exactly where kind of finding that line of tension to, okay, everybody's going to work hard, but we don't want to drive them past that point. And that's where those tools like that I mentioned before, Office Vibe or Amplify, or there's a bunch of them out there, can help you see that line before you hit it, so that you're not breaking things.
That's awesome. Let's get Layla to comment on some of this stuff. I see her smiling out there. What are your thoughts?
It's just because I can resonate with a lot of these points, actually, on the receiving and the giving end. To Scott's point about, asking for 10, I'm a sucker. I fell into that trap in as the one being managed. But also when I got into management positions, I found myself almost doing the same, but with a little bit of a balance. I have to add that, my management style has always been more of, I'm going to ask for as much as I can, but I want to also be able to build trust with my team. As in, I want them to be able to feel like they can come and talk to me at the same time and say, hey, I can't meet this deadline. This is not enough, because I don't want to be like, okay, I'm going to work my butt off and not get any sleep for 3 days because I'm trying to meet this deadline when that's not really the reality I was looking for, right? And that's not even in, in my research in my research days at University of Miami, where I had a team, but also even when I was much younger, I was born and raised in the Atlanta area in Georgia, and my family had a restaurant, and I grew up in that business, and so I also had staff that I had to manage, and so it was also kind of it's almost the same principles of some people took a little bit longer to get things to understand certain concepts, to know how to do things, and I was always like kind of not shadowing them or trying to micromanage, but also providing some support so that they can get it themselves and not be afraid to approach me with any concerns.
Delegating is the hardest thing that anybody has to do. And so what you said just made me want to throw a curveball question, quickly go around lightning round to all of you. What are your comments on how to delegate? What's some good advice? I think everybody is constantly growing and changing in this way.
And maybe Dhavide, you can start with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key things, actually, both Scott and Layla have talked a lot about the idea of trust. And there are different notions of trust. Like there's one in the sense of being sure that the person you're dealing with is, not malicious and they're not being dishonest. But then there's also a notion of trust in terms of reliability. Like, so someone may genuinely promise to do something with the best intention of doing it, but not be able to do it and having difficulty admitting it. So I think that trust is I've come to appreciate very much since moving into the business world, into the private sector, the importance of trust in all of my relationships on every level. And I think that and understanding how well you have to actually build that, because it's something that, I have to build trust from my team so that they know that when they aren't able to, when they do realize, oh, I promised I would do that, but I'm not able to do it, I have to make sure that they trust me well enough that they'll come and tell me that. And that's something that I have to earn from them, because trust isn't something that it's not something that's given, it's something that is earned. And then at the same time, the flip side of that is I also have to trust that I have a good sense of whether or not they actually are going to be able to fulfill on that, and whether or not I've actually judged that correctly. So building all of that, it requires a lot of nuance and care in actually how well I've managed my relationships with the team.
Great point. Maybe Scott, real quick.
Yeah, I run a team of 30 right now, and so you have to delegate. If I'm doing anything myself, I'm really not doing my job right. For me, there's two key pieces to delegating effectively. Number one, you have to keep in your mind what everyone is working on so that you can keep track. You can check in. Hey, how is this going? Have you talked to this person? When can we expect? Because if you lose track of it, if you forget that you asked for it, one, it probably won't get done. And number two, your employees will start to realize that you just fling tasks at them and you don't necessarily check in. You lose the ability to actually run efficiently that way. The other thing is to really get a sense of how to ask questions without making someone feel like you are indicating how to do it or telling them how to do it, because nothing disarms an individual employee's ability to make progress than thinking, oh, is my boss going to tell me how to do it? So should I just hold off until, he gives me the green light?
That's a great point. That's a fantastic point. Real quick, maybe Peter Thompson, you want to comment on that? How you manage your team?
Those were both great points. I would add that you really need to provide them vision and purpose for the tasks that you're doing. They need to understand why they're doing it, be on board with why they're doing it, understand the importance, and own it. So you just have to give them that.
That's brilliant. Vision and purpose. You have to explain things, right? This is what I've come to understand as well. When most people are fairly intelligent, when you explain to them why you want them to do something, they're almost always going to be willing to work with you, or maybe ask questions, for example. But what people don't like to be told is, look, just do this and be quiet about it. That's not even going to fly anymore in today's world, right? I mean, that is an old mindset. of, hey, everything rolls downhill, do what I say, etc. That's not working so well with the Great Resignation. We had a whole bunch of people just walk away from jobs they didn't like. But folks, podcast bonus segment is up here next. You are listening to DM Radio.